Thank you all for your patience. I was on another call. So I appreciate anyone who stayed while I was still on that other call. And I'm really glad that you all are tuned in because this is a topic that I've been wanting to discuss for so long. And now just seems to be a really good time to talk about it because there are at least two SPAC companies that are in trouble that I want to go over in bigger detail that have been in the news in the past couple of weeks or even today. So first off, my name is Laura Forsick. I am the executive director of Astra, which is a space consulting firm. And so we help businesses, government entities, and nonprofits to grow in space. And I have been in the space sector for about 20 years. Woo! Yeah. So I want to talk to you about special purpose acquisition corporations, SPACs. I'm going to use that term a lot, SPACs. Hi, Ross. Good to see you. For those of you who don't know what a SPAC is, and I am not a financial analyst, I'm a space analyst. So, I understand the space aspect of it, but I do not understand the financial mechanisms of a SPAC. What I do know is that they were super high in like 2020, 2021 here in the United States as a mechanism for going public. So a lot of space startups, small space companies used the SPAC method to go public more quickly than a traditional IPO. And the way that it works, from my understanding, again, I'm not a financial analyst, but the way I understand that it works is that a shell company is set up with committed funding, semi-committed funding from investors. And these shell companies then need to go find a startup to invest in, because it doesn't need to be a startup, a company to invest in. And it just so happens that I think Virgin Galactic was one of the first. We're going to talk about Virgin Galactic in 2019. In fact, I think actually there were older examples of space SPACs, but they just were not popular. It really did not get to be such a super popular mechanism until 2020, 2021, that time frame. And so what we saw were these shell companies being set up and looking for a company to invest in. And they chose some companies that were probably not the right ones to invest in. Hello, Kasapi. Thank you for joining live. Not the right ones. And I'm going to talk about why. I think it's much more important to talk about why these space SPACs were not as successful as people hoped. And then one example of one that actually was fairly, somewhat successful and why that one was successful. And so what happened was we had agreements. The Shell SPAC company would bring a space startup to its investors. Again, I'm not an expert in this part, but they would then agree upon investing in this and their deal would be made and the two would merge. And by merging, then the space company would be listed on the stock exchange, whatever stock exchange it decided to be listed on. So that's in a nutshell what my understanding of SPACs is, given that I don't have a financial background, I have a space background. So if you remember back in 2020, 2021, this was all the rage. There was deals being made left and right. And believe it or not, they're still happening. But what happened is the federal government here in the United States kind of put a pause on it or really slowed it down because it was being abused. And there was all this money flowing in from investors who were not doing the due diligence that they really needed to do. Now, we being Astrolytical, actually did do some due diligence for investors in this time frame, where we actually advised investors not to invest in certain really risky investment opportunities, which ended up being the right move. Unfortunately, a lot of these investors, they took that risk, and it did not pay out for them, nor the companies that they invested in. So the one I want to talk about the most right now is Astra. And the reason why I want to focus on Astra today is, one, I've been wanting to talk about them for a long time because I was super skeptical way back in the day. I believe it was like 2020 or 2021 when they were talking about launching essentially daily by 2025, 300 times a year by 2025. Now, when a company, a startup who has not successfully launched yet, because at that time, they had not had any successful launches. They had a close success. They almost had a successful launch in late 2020, I want to say. But by February 2021, when they went SPAC, they did not have a fully successful mission launched. And when a company that has not proven itself says that they're going to do something that SpaceX has not done, right? SpaceX is not launching 300 times a year by 2025. SpaceX wants to launch over 100 times this year, 2024. And I believe they'll do that for sure. I think 120, I think is what their estimate was in January. But yeah, they're definitely going to launch over 100 times in 2024. They might get to 150 times in 2025, not 300, right? Astra saying that they were going to launch 300 times a year by 2025 was, yeah, plucky, but overambitious. I like that, Ross. Thank you. Yeah, overambitious. And then they had other things that were questionable that they had in their press releases, in their pitch deck. They just had all these red flags. Someone actually recently posted their original graphic, and it had like a comparison with other companies, including a comparison with SpaceX, and they way overestimated their own capabilities, but they way underestimated SpaceX. It's kind of funny how that works out. But yeah, so I've been skeptical about Astra for a while. I cheer on these space startups, but when I see red flags, I start to pay attention in a way that is much more skeptical, because that's my job, right? I am a space fan, but I'm also a space analyst. And so the analyst side of me takes over when I see these red flags, and I'm like, this is not going to work out the way I want. So what happened is in February 2021, they had a $2.6 billion valuation when they went SPAC. $2.6 billion. That's a lot of money for a small startup that hadn't proven itself yet. Because like I said, they had not yet launched a successful mission at that point. or to date, I think. Maybe they launched one. I actually forgotten. But in any case, yeah, so they unfortunately have not really proven themselves since. So in 2022, because they're a publicly traded company, it's kind of nice. We do get their financial figures that is required by the SEC. And so 2022, they made $9.4 million in revenue and a net loss of 411.4 million. So they gained 9.4, they lost 411.4 in 2022. In 2023, they had a revenue of nearly 3.9 million. And I won't get into too many of the details, but none of that was launch revenue because they didn't launch in 2023. They've abandoned their first version of the rocket. They're working on their second version of a rocket. And so all of that revenue was from a company that they actually acquired. They acquired a company that does parts like units, and there was drama there. I won't go into it, but there was drama, and a lot of the initial employees from that acquisition actually quit. So it wasn't even as profitable as they hoped because they had a lot of turnover with that acquisition. But because of that acquisition, they had revenue. 100% of their revenue came from that acquisition in 2023 of $3.9 million with a net loss of 1.7. Oh my gosh, I'm just not. 178.4 million. So they gained about 4 million. They lost almost 180 million. Not as bad as 2022, right? But still not great. So they're bleeding money. They have been considering Chapter 7 bankruptcy for several months now. Their stock fell below the $1 trading limit. They had to do a reverse stock. Again, I'm not a financial expert, so I don't know the details of how that works exactly. But in order to stay listed, they did all kinds of things to try to keep themselves listed. And then finally, back at the end of 2023, they were really discussing amongst themselves whether or not they should do a Chapter 11 or a Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Chapter 11 is essentially a reorganization. Chapter 7 is liquidation. And they decided that they were either going to do a Chapter 7 liquidation bankruptcy, or the executive CEO, Chris Kemp, and the chief technology officer, Adam London, decided to make an offer to take the company private. So they did all that work to go IPO through a SPAC, to go public, and now they want to take it private. Their initial suggestion of $1.50 per share got knocked down. It's 50 cents per share is, I think, what they went with. So March of this year, the board, faced with the decision of either Chapter 7 bankruptcy or this deal to take the company private, they decided to take the company private. So that deal is ongoing. It's not finalized yet, but as of right now, Chris Kemp and Adam London are taking the company private. And let's see. I think that's all the details that we have. That's everything in my notes right now. So what's next with Astra? Well, I don't know. They are bleeding money. Their new rocket is not yet operational. I don't know when they're going to actually launch it, if they're going to even be able to launch it before running out of money, essentially. So when you take a company private, it does make things a little bit more stable in terms of the fact that they can keep their finances secret and they don't have to make everything public to the SEC. They don't have to be beholden to public stakeholders, just the private stakeholders. So it could be that they are able to downsize and figure out what they want to do with the company and really turn themselves around. Like, there have been companies like Firefly is a really good example. Firefly, essentially their first company, Firefly Space Systems, right? That was the first version. I mean, it went under, and then Firefly Aerospace essentially came from the ashes. So I think I got that right. I think the naming, but in any case, like, you see companies that just sort of die and then return. And so Astra could be that, but I don't know if Astra is strong enough to do that because they did not really have any successes with their rocket in any meaningful way while they were launching. And again, they haven't launched in so long. And I don't know what the current status of their new rocket is. Other than what they publicly said, I don't know if that one is going to be successful when they first try to launch it. So I would like to know from you guys what you think the future of Astra is. I don't think it looks bright, but I don't think they're dead yet. They certainly are on the brink of death. But this is an example of a company that should have never gone SPAC because they were nowhere near profitable. They were nowhere near even operational when they went SPAC. And that is a theme that you see throughout all these examples, is the fact that these companies just went public too early. A company goes public, yes, to get that influx of money, but also when they're more stable of a company, when they're profitable. That's ideally, in my opinion, what it should be. And we do not see that with a lot of these examples. I'm going to move on to Virgin Galactic because they were also in the news today. And by the way, both Virgin Galactic and Astra have stories in spacenews.com, which is where I was reading about it today. Astra, because they finally did their first quarter filing and posted that yesterday. Virgin Galactic has been in the news quite a bit, actually, the past couple of months, unfortunately, but they had another story that came out today. And see, Virgin Galactic, I had such high hopes for. There are a lot of people who are cheering them on. There are also people who are rightfully skeptical about Virgin Galactic because of the way that they've operated, the very, very, very slow pace, the unsafe environment, the lack of transparency. Back in 2019, October 2019, is when Virgin Galactic went SPAC, and they were essentially the first. I mean, I think there was actually one that went public like decades ago that through a SPAC mechanism, but like Intelsat or something like that. I'm not great with that kind of history, but Virgin Galactic was the first of like this trend of companies going SPAC from 2019 all the way to like 20. Actually, it's still ongoing. There's actually companies that are still, like, as of last year, going SPAC. Space companies, I mean, just to clarify. So Virgin Galactic, they had an estimated value of $2.2 billion when they went public back in 2019. At that point, they had successful test flights with their own employees, but they had not flown a commercial flight yet. They won't fly a commercial flight until July 2021. If you remember, that was like the race of billionaires. We had Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos, and Richard Branson of Virgin Galactic wanting to fly both July of 2021. Blue Origin made the announcement. Virgin Galactic decided to beat them to space with Richard Branson. And so Richard Branson actually flew first. I thought that was just reckless. And it turned out I was kind of right, because even though nothing went wrong with that flight, thank God, because Wally Funk was on that. She's a national treasure, that woman. But later turned out that they had violated airspace. They had done something where the FAA was not pleased with how they operated. So I've actually been really skeptical of Virgin Galactic since 2021, the way that they've operated and how unsafe they kind of are. I'm really, really super thankful that two of my friends and colleagues who flew last year did not die. Oh my gosh. Every time that thing flies, I'm like, please don't die, please don't die, please don't die. Ross says, people assume that Virgin Galactic will prevail because of their origins with Richard Branson, but his pockets aren't as deep as Musk and Bezos. That is true. And Virgin Galactic, unfortunately, is not getting any more revenue, or not getting any more influx of money, I should say, from Richard Branson. He's already cut them off. He cut off Virgin Orbit. I'm going to talk about Virgin Orbit too. But I want to stay on topic here with Virgin Galactic first. So they did have their first commercial crude flight with the Italian Air Force back in June of 2023. So they went public October 19, but it took them almost 4 years to then get a commercial flight going. They've had 6 commercial flights altogether. They're aiming for a 7th one this quarter, and then they're going to pause. They're just going to stop flying for a while they work on transitioning to their Delta class fleet. They have like Unity that they've been flying. They've got an older fleet of vehicles. Now they're working on transitioning to a newer fleet of vehicles called Delta, which they're hoping is going to be commercially operational by 2026. So after this next flight, I think that's their last until 2026. So 2 years. So 2 years of not making money, essentially. They've got like some kind of fee system going with the people who have already booked flights. But aside from those people, like they're not opening up to new tickets and they're not flying. So they're essentially not bringing in revenue after this next, they call it, what do they call it? Galactic 07 is the next one that they're aiming for this quarter. And ever since they made that announcement of pausing flights back in November of last year, their stock has just declined. Both Astra and Virgin Galactic are trading under $1 right now. That's the big news. That's why Virgin Galactic was in the news today or yesterday, is because they went down under $1. As of a few hours ago when I last looked it up, they're still trading under $1 and falling. So not looking good. They're looking at a reverse stock option to try to fix that. Again, I don't understand how that all works because I'm not a financial analyst. But I do know that them pausing revenue operations and essentially commercial operations for 2 years and hoping they can get Delta off the ground in 2026 to make money. It's risky. It really is. Because are they going to have enough money? Are they going to launch in 2 years? Because their entire history, 2004 is when they first started selling tickets, the end of 2004, essentially. After the X Prize was won with Scaled Composites, Virgin Galactic came in and essentially started selling tickets. And I off the top of my head, I forget, but I think it was something like they were planning commercial operations in like 2009 or something like ridiculously way early compared to reality. and so the pace that Virgin Galactic has progressed is so slow that I don't really have faith that they're going to have Delta operational in 2026. Test flights in 2025, they say, and commercial operation in 2026. So I don't know. The other reason why Virgin Galactic is in the news is because they had a contract with Boeing to work on these Delta class vehicles. And for various reasons, Boeing is suing. So that was the news last month, is that Boeing is suing Virgin Galactic for essentially not deleting trade secrets and something about unpaid bills. And now Virgin Galactic is countersuing Boeing. So it's a bit of a financial mess. So yeah, I don't really know what's going to go on with Virgin Galactic. I don't know if they're going to be delisted or if this reverse stock split is going to work. I can tell you that they had a revenue of $6.8 million in 2023 and a net loss of $502 million. And a revenue of $2 million in 2002 and a net loss of $500 million. So they're losing approximately $500 million every year, and they're only bringing in a handful of million as revenue. And that revenue now is going to stop after, not stop, but like essentially extremely slow down after this next flight. So they're essentially not going to bring in much at all, as they're losing about $500 million a year. They did do some layoffs. They're trying to cut costs. I don't know. Let me know in the comments or the chat how you feel about Virgin Galactic's success in the future. Again, it's a company that was not operational when it went public. We're just going to have to see. I do want to briefly mention Virgin Orbit, since I did mention them in passing. Virgin Orbit was a spinoff of Virgin Galactic. It spun off, I should have looked this up beforehand. I want to say 2019. Is that right? Anyway, it spun off. It went public in 2021, and it failed in 2023. Almost a year ago now is when it went bankrupt. Chapter 11 bankruptcy. So I actually don't know what happened exactly, but I think they sold off their assets. I know that other companies took over the buildings that they were in. Yeah. So Virgin Orbit was one that went SPOC. Like it wasn't even close to operational. Unfortunately, they had that big flight in the UK that was like make or break. like they were really trying to get money from the UK, from Europe in general. And so they had that big flight in the UK that failed. And I believe if they hadn't failed, they might have had more of a success. But that's the thing, right? If you go public before you prove yourself, it really just does not work out well. There are some other companies I wanted to mention. Terran Orbital, Spire, Rocket Lab. We'll talk about Rocket Lab. Momentous is another one. I don't think we have time in this live stream to really talk about these. I want to briefly mention Terran Orbital. Right now, Lockheed Martin might buy Terran Orbital. So Lockheed Martin actually is a quarter owner, more than a quarter owner of Terran Orbital. Terran Orbital has some drama. It had some drama in the news regarding its former CEO. You can look this stuff up. There was lawsuits. It was bad. They had layoffs, and Lockheed Martin made an offer back in March to buy Terran Orbital. Let's see, $1 cash for each share of outstanding Terran common stock. So that's pending right now. We're going to see how that is. And someone asked about Momentous. I'm sorry, I didn't really look into Momentous too much, but that's another one that's struggling right now. Momentous had some layoffs as well at the end of last year. I know that they are, they had to do a reverse stock split, as did Spire, in order to stay listed. Their stock also went under $1. So yeah, things are not looking good. Now, I do want to say that not all space stocks are struggling. I want to specifically talk about Rocket Lab. And so Rocket Lab, I would say, is one of the most successful rocket companies that are, U.S. technically companies. They are, not as successful, obviously, as SpaceX, but they are actually one of the more successful companies that are technically based in the U.S. They operate out of New Zealand and the U.S. And I believe last year they launched more times than ULA, which is just unbelievable. Wow. So Rocket Lab is actually doing fairly well. It's not trading as high as when it listed. So it went SPOC in August of 2021, and it had a valuation of $4.1 billion. It was over $10 that it initially started trading. It's now about $3 and some cents. So it's not trading as high, but it's doing fairly well. It's going right. It's getting DoD contracts. It's actually doing really well with not only its Electron, but it has plans for Neutron. That's the larger rocket, and they've got other plans that they've recently announced. I actually think Rocket Lab is doing well, and the reason why Rocket Lab is doing well compared to the other examples is because it was actually operational and profitable. I think profitable, but it was at least operational when it went public. So by August of 2020, it had already been launching rockets successfully for 3 years. It had 21 launch attempts by that time, 18 of which were successful. So it was already operational. It was already making money by the time it went public. And that is a huge difference when we're talking about some of these other companies that hadn't even launched a rocket successfully yet. So when you're thinking about going public, and again, I'm no expert, this is not financial advice, but if you're thinking about going public, I really think it makes sense for you to consider whether or not you have that stable revenue that you can bring back to your stakeholders. It's different when you're private. When you're private, I believe that the risk is on the individual, whereas when you're public, I think you will have more of a fiduciary responsibility to your stakeholders. I don't know, maybe I'm not saying that right, but in any case, I think that's the major difference, is that Rocket Lab was already profitable, or at least already gaining revenue, already operational for 3 years. But some of these other companies, almost all of these other companies were not. And that makes a big difference. So my hat's off to Rocket Lab for successfully going SPOC, even if they're trading at $3 and some cents right now. I really think that they could grow quite a bit. I don't know what's going on with Astra and Virgin Galactic and some of these other ones. Let's see. Ross says 12 Rocket Lab launches in 2023, 3 launches from ULA in 2023. Yeah, that's wow. I didn't realize it was that much of a difference. Thank you, Ross. That's 4 times. Rocket Lab launched 4 times more in 2023 than ULA did. Now, of course, ULA was waiting on certain things, like engines for its Vulcan. But still, that's quite a bit of a difference, isn't it? So I like to keep these live streams fairly short, but I would love to know your opinions on any of these companies, as well as ones I didn't get a chance to talk about, Momentous, Spire, and some of these other ones that went SPOC that There's probably somewhere in the middle. There's probably a bunch that are like not like about to die or about to be delisted, but like some that are also not super successful either. And so I'd like to know your opinion on what it is that makes a SPOC successful. And this mechanism has not completely stopped. It has slowed significantly, but there are still companies that are using this to go public. And whether or not you think that's a good idea, especially those of you who are more financially savvy and knowledgeable than I am, I would love to know what you think, in 2024 makes the difference with a company going SPOC, especially a space company going SPOC versus a traditional IPO method or staying private. So thank you all for joining me. I appreciate you, and go ahead and subscribe. I do these every Friday. Thank you. Take care. Have a good weekend.